Hello and welcome back to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. To discuss Ukrainian President Zelensky's visit to the United States and his meetings with President Biden and Vice President Harris, I'm delighted to welcome Marcin Bużański. He's director at the Center for Diplomacy and Negotiation, Collegium Civitas. Welcome, Mr. Bużański.
I'm very glad. Good evening. I'm very glad to be with you tonight.
Delighted to have you here, Mr. Bużański. Thanks for taking the time. So, $8 billion. It's quite a lot of money. Do you think this is the final tranche that the US is going to give Ukraine for a little while?
Well, certainly not. This is not the final tranche. This is part of a larger package which has been approved by the Congress a few months back. Such a crucial one for Ukraine, of course, because guaranteeing for the foreseeable future that there will be funding made available. But importantly, the distribution of that has been accelerated. Biden has also given very clear instructions that a large part of it is to be allocated from Pentagon's reserves. Over $5 billion of that package will go into directly upgrading the stockpiles that Ukraine has available at the moment, which of course is a significant amount, and it's an important support package. But as mentioned, there will be more to come for sure. I think importantly, it's also done before the elections in the US, where we still have to see what the result will be. It's not clear who will be the winner. So every effort is made on, of course, the Ukrainian side, but also on the current administration in the US to secure as much support as is possible before that event.
Understood. I want to come to that and the possible options if President Trump were to win the White House. But before we get to that, what can you share about the mood in Congress about continued support for Ukraine? I mean, it did take a long time to get this bill passed, didn't it?
Certainly. I think Congress is watching very closely what's going to happen in November. And of course, we're not going to see the presidential election, but also a third of the Congress will change seats or remain seats, but the seats will be up for grab in the election. So there's been a major effort of lobbying in Congress from the Ukraine side to make sure that there is bipartisan support for Ukraine. And I have to say that despite some hiccups on this path that, of course, we've seen, a big part of the Republicans and, of course, a very strong majority, if not all of the Democrats, are in favor of continued support for Ukraine. That excludes, the most far right Trumpist, the sort of Tea Party movements that we've known, and of course they'll be watching very closely, banking on the result that Donald Trump wins in the elections. But we're also seeing recently, very recently, the last 2 days, worrying events as, even the pictures we're watching right now. This is President Zelenskyy in Pennsylvania, in Joe Biden's hometown, at a munitions factory where he visited it. He was signing it, and the governor of Pennsylvania, Shapiro, was present. Of course, this is the most important swing state for these elections, and this visit has been labeled by the Republican leadership in the Congress as Ukraine favoring the Democratic candidate in the election. So there's been an unprecedented letter being issued by the head of the Republicans in the Congress, which actually called for firing of the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S., pointing out that all of this was designed to support the Democratic candidate. So definitely not something that's going to score points for Zelenskyy and for Ukraine at this time at the Republican side. But I still think that considering the overall priorities of the strategic priorities of the United States, there is still a very strong group in Congress that would support Ukraine's assistance. Of course, the composition of it will be dependent on the elections in November.
Understood. Now, President Trump has been very quiet. He's been very tight-lipped about his plans, other than to say that, well, he'd end the war in a day, which is part of the Trump persona, I suppose. Do you really believe that he intends to turn the tap off on the day he becomes president, if he does?
Well, we've seen quite a lot of instances where Donald Trump says one thing and does something completely different. We have an experience of his previous administration. I think this would not be an instant of let's say closing the tap from one day to another. It would be strategically a major mistake, and I think that even key advisors around Donald Trump are very aware of this. Donald Trump is playing this card of being the great negotiator, of having a relationship with Vladimir Putin, of the priority of ending the war, and of how much it costs the United States. But in fact, this is primarily trying to play into a nationalistic, America first electoral base that has been his political priority for quite a long time, and political message. I don't think that'll translate into exactly the same policy of the United States of a new Donald Trump administration were he to take office. That said, without doubt, it would change the type of assistance provided by the U.S. I believe it would be much more transactional. It would be probably much more focused on buying directly from U.S. manufacturers. So if I could, speculate a bit, if we're seeing a package now where out of 8 billion, 5.5 is coming from Pentagon stockpiles, and 2.5 has been bought from directly from manufacturers, perhaps that would be a figure that would be diverted the other way around.
Yes, but the 5.5. Sorry to interrupt you, but the $5.5 billion worth of weaponry from Pentagon stocks will be replaced, and it'll be replaced by US manufacturers. So it is a bit more circuitous of a route, but at the end of the day, it's the American manufacturers of weaponry that get the benefit of it. Would you agree?
I do agree, absolutely. And it is a case to be made, but it doesn't sell so well politically. Yeah. You'd have to show it. It's a long-term process. You'd have to explain this. Anything that's complicated to explain in a long-term strategic process is not something that Donald Trump will use and will talk about.
Understood.
It is also the fact that Donald Trump tries to build a persona of being a strong man. He likes strong man leaders around the world. He tries to identify with them. So in many ways, he sees Vladimir Putin as somebody that he can level with and play a card of a counterpart.
Understood. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Mr. Bużański, and I want to ask you a couple more questions before we run out of time. The first of those is the number of the weapons that President Zelenskyy is getting do have long-range capabilities. Is this a hint by the Biden administration that they're on the way to allowing Ukraine to attack Russian military targets on Russian soil?
I think they are very close to making that decision. However, there are a number of factors. First of all, it is a controversial decision from a political standpoint. Therefore, I doubt that it would be made before the elections, because then Donald Trump would play to a card of pushing the U.S. on the brink of war with Russia. not something that Kamala Harris wants on her talking points. Second of all, there is still some doubt on as to the strategic implications of that move for Ukraine's victory. It's of course very important.
Right.
I would say it's essential, but the U.S. has to still see how it fits into a longer-term strategy, and this is something that we're expecting now to hear about from President Zelenskyy when he visits the White House, the famous victory plan, and the leaks we are getting from the U.S. administration are that it's not there to the level that they're expected. So
understood.
Probably.
Well, we'll be keeping a very close eye on the victory plan and what happens going forward. Thank you very much, Mr. Bużański, for taking the time to share your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening, sir.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you. And that's all from us on this episode of World Talks. Good night.